Hi, I'm Faye, and in this video we're going to continue studying the figure, moving on from gesture to now the form. We'll see how to add three-dimensionality to our drawings and even play a little bit with perspective. So first, I'll give a quick summary of the key concepts and then share the best resources that I found and explain what each resource is good for. Finally, I'll explain a bit how you can practice these concepts and use these resources. But next week's video will be the full exercise demonstration for figure drawing form. So let's start by defining exactly what is form and why it's important to study it. Form is, in very simple words, the 3D shape of an object and how it exists in 3 dimensions. And as artists, we're constantly trying to trick people into thinking that a 2D drawing that they're looking at is something that exists in 3D space, be it a person or a landscape. As you might imagine, that's no small task. It's very difficult to overcome the 2D-ness of the paper or medium that you're using, like paper, canvas, or digital. But it is achievable using the right tools, which is the form. So let's take a look at the key concepts and how they can help you achieve a 3D aspect. The concepts are volumes, landmarks, wrapping lines, and areas of intersection. It's less concepts than what we saw in gesture, but to compensate, they're much more difficult to apply. Volumes are the building blocks that we're going to use to build the form, such as cylinders, cubes, pyramids, spheres, etc. So a head can be simplified into a sphere, or the torso can be simplified into a box or cube, and arms and legs can be simplified into cylinders. Simplifying something complex, such as the different body parts, into more simple volumes will make it much easier for us to understand how they work in this 3D space and to manipulate them. Landmarks are the parts of the skeleton that are visible on the body, so on the surface of the body. They're very useful because they don't change much from person to person, and they can be used as reference points or as a guide to where the volumes start and finish. For example, in the torso, you have the collarbone, the end of the ribcage, and the pelvis is also very commonly used. Wrapping lines are exactly what the name suggests, lines that wrap around the form or the volume. They are not necessarily going to be there in your final drawings, but they're very useful to maintain the illusion of 3-dimensionality for ourselves. Before you can try to convince anyone that your drawing is something 3D, you first need to convince yourself so that you can manipulate it and rotate it around. It also helps in showing the direction of the volume if it's facing away or towards you. And the last concept is areas of intersection. So the body isn't just disconnected volumes put together. They're forms that are connected, and where they connect, they intersect. Showing intersection and overlapping in forms really strengthens this idea of 3D-ness and makes it much more convincing. So now we can move on to the best resources, and here I'm going to do very similar to what I did in gesture. We're going to start with a basic overview and then we're going to dive deeper. And remember to study smart by setting a time frame. How long are you going to study the form? And read or watch the resources multiple times while you're practicing. Before you even start thinking about using volumes to draw the figure, it's important that you're very familiar with the basic volumes. Because drawing the figure in form is already a very difficult task, and it will be much more difficult if you don't know these volumes well. And for this, there's no better resource than Draw a Box. As the name suggests, you will draw lots of boxes and cylinders, but you will really learn and understand well the form and how to use it to build different objects, such as plants, bugs, and animals. If you have already done Draw a Box or you just want to start with a quick recap of the forms, then you can go to Proko's video, but really nothing can replace Draw a Box. So I highly recommend you get to at least the 250 cylinders challenge. And again, for a quick demonstration, just 4 minutes of greatness, Carolyn's video is everything. You can see how you can use all of the basic volumes to build a complete figure. Now we're going to move on to books, and we only have 2 this time, and the first one is the same, Figure Drawing Design and Invention by Michael Hampton. As I said, this book is really amazing on the topic. It goes over gesture, form, anatomy, and even goes into portrait as well. So it's a really well-organized explanation that I haven't found in other books. And it also shows the different styles for form that you can use to build a body, which is something very important. Some people will tell you to draw with boxes, others with cylinders, and all of the different variations of forms that you can use. And it's important to see all of them to know which one works best for you. The next book is Figure Drawing for Artists by Steve Hewson. He gives different exercises that you can do in master studies. There are a ton of super detailed examples on how you can build the figure as forms. And this book is particularly good for the small parts like the joints, hands, and feet, and how they intersect. As always, all of the links for these resources will be in the description, and I also have a blog post where I will be able to keep things updated. And for landmarks, I also recommend Proko's video where he goes really in depth on all of the landmarks of the body that you can use to draw the form. So for exercising and practicing, I wanted to remember to study in cycles. So each time you go through all of the steps, you start adding more complexity. In this case, more complexity would probably mean poses that are not standing. So the first time I recommend starting with standing poses. Next, you can do some sitting, crouching, kneeling. So slowly add more complexity and more difficulty to these steps. And I also recommend going from big to small so that you don't get too overwhelmed. So you start with the torso, then you add the limbs, and then you add the hands and feet. And you can add one of the key concepts on top of each step. So let me explain a little bit better, but remember next week's video is the full exercise demonstration where I will go really in depth on everything here that you see on these steps. So for step 1, get yourself acquainted with the landmarks. So watch Proko's video or read Hampton's book where he talks about landmarks, and you can focus on just the landmarks that are important for the torso and pelvis. And try to break them down into the basic volumes. You can use cylinders, boxes, or the oval in a bucket. Michael Hampton has a good guide on all of the different styles, and you can also watch Proko's video on the robo-bean to see how to break it down into cubes. Try all of them, but do what you find easier. And you can also mix and match if you find it's easier to draw the torso as a cylinder but the pelvis as a box. Do whatever works best for you. Do a lot of this to really understand how the cube or cylinder works in 3D space. As I said, all of these steps are really difficult, so make sure you get a good grasp on the first step before you move forward to the next step. That's why I also said to use just simple poses at first, because if you try to get a good grasp on all different sorts of poses, you're gonna get stuck. So make sure you understand it well with standing poses, and then you can already move on to the second step and not get stuck. In step 2, we'll start adding a bit more detail, going for smaller parts of the body, such as the arms, legs, and head. And since we're getting more complicated, we can also start adding wrapping lines to make things easier for us to understand. I recommend using cylinders for the limbs, though you can also taper them into boxes. For the head, I prefer using cylinders, but you can also do it as a sphere or a box. The biggest advice I can give here is to pay attention to the direction of the limb. So if it's facing away from you or towards you, that will change how the lines wrap around it. And it's going to affect what you can see the top or bottom of the cylinder. And finally, we can go for the smallest parts, adding the feet and head, and also you can start adding the other joints to connect the form and add some intersection. In here, I recommend doing focus studies, drawing only the hand and then only the feet, only the top half and only the bottom half of the body to really understand all of the detailed parts and joints. And then you can do exercises on the complete figure. This is very difficult and there's no right or wrong way on how you can do it. For some, it's easier to use boxes for joints, or others, it's better to use spheres. So use the volumes that work best for you. And after you finish these steps with simple poses, you can add more complexity. Remember also to analyze your drawings, taking notes on what's wrong and what's right, and copy some demonstrations to understand how to do them. These are all steps of active learning and the step-by-step guide that I mentioned in my first video. You can check it here. When you're analyzing your drawings, here are the more common problems that you might encounter and how to fix them. This is probably the most common problem because understanding how objects work in perspective is no small feat. If you're struggling too much with this, go back to the basics, go to draw a box, and really try to understand how the basic volumes work. And you can also draw directly on top of the reference if it's too difficult for you. Drawing with big blocks of volume can make your drawings look really heavy and stiff. So remember to keep the movement of the pose in mind. Start with the gesture and by exaggerating the gesture to combat this. It's very easy to forget about proportions because you have so many things to keep in mind. That's totally normal. You haven't just suddenly forgotten all the proportions you studied in gesture. Just remember to keep them in mind if you're seeing that your drawings are not very proportional. Remember the guide that Loomis has on proportion, and you can use it to compare the different parts of the body. If the limbs look like they're floating away from the body and don't look very connected, I recommend focusing more on intersection and really try to overlap the forms to see how they connect to each other. For example, how the leg connects to the pelvis and they intersect. So now take a look at the resources or find more of your own. Do the exercises or wait for next week's video with the exercise demonstration. And don't forget to submit your videos for feedback in the form that will be available in next week's video. I hope this video was helpful, and if you agree, please consider sharing with other artists, as well as liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. And if you have any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.